So, how do we actually acquire a new language? It sounds like a pretty straightforward question, right? But honestly, beneath the surface of language instruction lies this massive, decades long debate about the absolute best way to go from a total beginner to a fluent speaker. Do we sit down and memorize rules, or do we just jump right in and start talking? Well, in today's explainer, we're going to break down these complex theories of second language acquisition and see how they actually translate into practical, real world classroom strategies. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with a bit of a semantic puzzle. How does adding a single capital letter S spark one of the biggest debates in applied linguistics? On the left, we've got focus on form, and on the right, focus on form S. Obviously, they sound identical when you say them out loud, but that single capitalized S at the very end of the second term, it represents an entirely different universe of teaching philosophy. It's a distinction that has caused literally endless confusion among researchers and teachers, but understanding it is absolutely crucial to unlocking how we actually learn. So, here's how we're going to unpack this whole divide. First, we'll look at the great grammar debate. Then we'll clarify form versus forms, introduce the bowl of marbles analogy, dive into task-based language teaching, check out task complexity, and wrap up with meaningful assessment and feedback.
All right, part 1, the great grammar debate.
To really grasp this, we need to look back to Michael H. Long's foundational categorization from the 1990s. You see, Long realized the field was kind of stuck between two extremes, either teaching nothing but strict grammar rules or just tossing grammar out entirely for pure, unstructured communication. He needed a way to bring language mechanics back into the communicative classroom, but effectively. So he defined focus on form, no S, as addressing grammar spontaneously and only when it naturally pops up during communication. Imagine you're having a conversation in a new language and boom, you hit a roadblock. You don't know the past tense of a specific verb to finish your story. At that exact moment of need, the teacher steps in and gives you that specific linguistic form. The main focus is entirely on meaning and getting your story across. The grammar is just a handy tool to help you get there.
But as this quote from applied linguist Ron Sheen shows, things got incredibly messy in the academic world. Researchers like Norris and Ortega actually caused massive confusion by misclassifying explicit obtrusive grammar teaching as focus on form, which totally muddied the waters. They did these large meta-analyses claiming both approaches were equally effective, but they had fundamentally misunderstood Long's definition. They ended up lumping traditional grammar lessons under the totally wrong label. And this terminological chaos made it nearly impossible for educators to figure out what the data was actually saying. Moving on to part 2, form versus forms explained. Okay, so to avoid the exact same trap those researchers fell into, let's clearly separate these two philosophies. Focus on forms with an S is a very traditional skills learning approach. Just think back to the language classes you probably took in high school, right? It often uses the PPP model, where teachers present the rules, practice them through drills, and then ask students to produce the language. The core assumption here is that language learning is just a general cognitive skill. You learn the little pieces, the vocabulary lists, the verb conjugation tables, and eventually you just string them all together to communicate. Now, this table brilliantly illustrates that core divide. We can categorize focus on form S as a synthetic approach. It builds the language piece by piece to ensure accuracy first. But on the flip side, focus on form, without the S, is a holistic approach. It relies on meaning right from the very start, accepting that accuracy will come later through feedback and natural interaction. It essentially assumes that our brains are uniquely wired to acquire language through meaningful input, not just by rote memorization of detached rules. Which brings us to part 3, the bowl of marbles. Applied linguist Marcos Benavides actually gives us a stunning visual analogy to really make sense of this. Imagine drawing a complex photograph of a bowl of marbles. The synthetic approach is kind of like an artist drawing a grid over the photo and copying it perfectly, square by square, piece by piece. If you do it this way, sure, your first square is 100% accurate, but you have absolutely no idea what the picture actually is until you're basically finished. The holistic approach, on the other hand, is like sketching a rough outline of the entire bowl right away. It's not perfectly accurate, maybe the shading is off, the proportions are a little weird, but it is immediately identifiable as a bowl of marbles from minute 1. So the really crucial takeaway here is that language is infinitely complex, way more complex than a single photograph. And trying to learn it perfectly, piece by piece, takes so long that it severely demotivates learners. Think about it. If you have to wait 3 entire years to master verb conjugations before you're even allowed to have a real conversation, you're probably going to quit. The holistic approach gives you that rough, meaningful sketch of the language immediately, which keeps you engaged and motivated to slowly refine all those little details over time.
All right, section 4, task-based language teaching.
This brings us directly to the practical vehicle for that holistic approach in the classroom, task-based language teaching, or TBLT for short. According to researchers Ellis and Shintani, TBLT has strict rules that separate it from those traditional methods. First off, the primary focus is absolutely on meaning. Learners have to rely on their own linguistic resources initially, and honestly, this is the hardest part for traditional teachers. There is zero pre-teaching of specific grammar forms. You don't teach the past tense and then do a task. You do a task that requires the past tense and just see what the students can manage. Everything builds toward a clear communicative outcome. So a task isn't just fill in the blanks. A task is something real, like plan a conference or order a pizza.
Moving to part 5, sequencing and task complexity. Now, you might be wondering, if you aren't pre-teaching grammar points week by week, what on earth is the organizing principle of the syllabus? Well, you structure it by task complexity. Let's look at this sequence from the Widgets textbook, co-authored by Benavides. Here, the students pretend to be interns at a company. They move step by step from simple pedagogical tasks like writing a name card and shaking hands on day 1 to increasingly complex tasks like pitching a product, doing a poster presentation, and then finally tackling a highly complex real-world target task, a full job interview. The difficulty scales based on cognitive load and preparation time, not on some predetermined grammar list.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why TBLT works, even for absolute beginners. A super common myth out there is that you can only do task-based learning with advanced speakers. But Benavides notes a low-level student who successfully handled a complex project debrief interview. How did she do it? Well, because the expectation wasn't flawless grammar. The focus remained entirely on meaning. Was she understood? Did she communicate her team's progress? Yes, she did. It's just like that rough sketch of the bowl of marbles. It wasn't perfect, but the meaning was entirely intact and highly communicative.
And our final section, part 6, meaningful assessment and feedback. So how do educators actually assess these tasks without just breaking out a red pen and grading for grammar accuracy? Well, assessment in TBLT functions a lot like a flowchart. Step 1, you ask, was the task outcome achieved? It's just a simple yes or no. If the task was to order a pizza, did a pizza actually arrive? If yes, they passed. Step 2, you score the performance based on how persuasive, clear, or well-researched it was. And step 3, only at the very end do you offer secondary feedback on language forms, helping them refine their grammar for the next time they do the task.
Take the famous good night box student pitch that Benavides shares. A student actually pitched a phone attachment that literally sprays sleeping gas into your face so you stop scrolling and go to sleep. I mean, the idea was totally absurd, and his English grammar was definitely not perfect. But because he was highly persuasive, organized, and easily understood, he successfully achieved the communicative task. He got the meaning across perfectly, earning a really high score before ever getting specific feedback on his little language slips.
Ultimately, language is not just some dry list of rules to be memorized in total isolation. It's a dynamic tool for immediate communication. So, wrapping up this explainer, I want you to ask yourself about your own language journey. Did you spend years trying to perfectly copy the grid, piece by piece? Or did you dive headfirst into the bowl of marbles and embrace the messy, meaningful reality of true communication? Keep that in mind the next time you set out to learn something new.